Hi everyone. Hope you had a good weekend. Hope everything is going well for you. And believe it or not, we're at the beginning of week 4. So can't believe summer is flying by. It'll be fall before we know it. So hope you're enjoying the class thus far. I always enjoy working with you guys. So I hope that everything is going well in the class. And as always, if you have any questions at all, I don't hear much from you, so please just let me know if you have any questions, issues, anything. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help clarify anything or answer any questions, anything at all. So I did send out this past week. I sent out the invites for our synchronous session, which is next week. We'll be going over some HIPAA case studies. So don't worry. There's no massive um, pre-class prep. But please make sure that you RSVP to the calendar invite that I sent, so I have an idea of how many people are coming to each session. I just want to make sure I have some clue. Also, if I think everyone here has used the Collaborate before, but if you haven't, make sure you go out and test your system so that everything is copacetic with the Collaborate. If you had issues with it last time, I think your class is the group that was the kind of my Collaborate guinea pig. I've used it many times since. If you guys weren't that group, but I use it. I use it all the time now. In my opinion, it's 1,000 times better than Google Hangout. I've used it with a group of 25 with no dropouts, no issues at all. So it's in my opinion more reliable. Um, but if you did have issues last time and you want to test it, you can go in the test group. But if you have issues, feel free to reach out to the IT folks. They're very helpful, and they'll help you resolve any of those issues. Like if you couldn't get your camera to work, or if you had issues with sound, they're very helpful. They might be able to resolve. Maybe you need to update one of the settings that you have on your browser. So just be sure to reach out to them. They can help with that. Okay, so last week we talked a bit about open last week's thing here. We talked a little bit about policy development, various aspects of policy formulation, implementation, and I know in your text there were a lot of chapters, and I apologize. This is when it does get difficult to cover 16 weeks worth of work in an 8-week class, but I do want to make sure that we get through as much info as we can. But in our discussion, we talked about narrow networks, and I know that really the purpose of discussing narrow networks had to do with the ACA and how some folks got caught up across the country, got caught up in very narrow networks, and unfortunately, it really had to do with people not knowing what they were buying. The concept of consumers not really being health literate and product literate, really, when it came down to what they were purchasing within these narrow networks. And part of it was just the assumption on behalf of the payer that people would be knowledgeable about what they were buying. And the other part of it was that people, especially these folks that were coming into the health exchanges, a good number of them had just never, they didn't have health insurance at that point. So they really weren't knowledgeable about the network, and they just assumed that there would be physicians available to them. So it was on the fault of both sides of the coin. But I think I'd posted in the discussion boards that really, like Western PA is a good model for narrow networks because there are narrow networks right there for everybody, for commercial payers as well. UPMC is a good example of that, in that in the Western PA area, their network is not narrow at all. You can see, if you're in Pittsburgh, in the greater Pittsburgh area, you can see if you have UPMC health plan, you can see any type of provider. You could see from a primary care physician to a highly detailed specialist like pediatric pulmonology to any type of specialist is available to you within a short drive, half an hour. You could see a highly detailed specialist. However, we had looked at picking up UPMC coverage for myself because that's what RMU offers. But I live in New York State, and I would have to drive an hour and a half just to see a rheumatologist, so which is a doctor that I see sometimes once a month. So so it just wasn't. It created a narrow network for me because not because they were doing that purposefully, but because UPMC Health Plan was really focused on their area, and when in the area that they really service. But when employers were purchasing UPMC Health Plan products for their staff, they weren't really thinking outside of that box. Now, I think I'm the exception to the rule in that I'm an employee and I would have that coverage. But thinking about the norm would be, okay, I'm myself and my spouse live in Western PA, but we have children that go to school in Alaska, California, any of these far-reaching states that it may be very difficult for folks to get to find providers within the network that they contract with. It's not a UPMC network. It's a network that UPMC contracts with for people that are outside of the network, outside of the state or Western PA. So it's you can receive out-of-network coverage. Obviously, there's certainly room for that, but it's at a much higher price, higher cost to the patient. So you have a good example of that narrow network right in the Western PA region, if it happens to be where you live. And it's not at the fault of UPMC Health Plan by any means. It tends to be the fault of the employer not realizing what constraints they're putting on their employees. And hence the reason that we're going with Cigna coverage when my husband goes to Duquesne. So we don't have that constraint for our children that go to school at Florida State and Syracuse. So they need that broader network available to them. We will live in Pittsburgh, obviously, so we can see, we would be available to see Pittsburgh providers. But otherwise, great discussion. Hopefully you enjoyed the day in the life interview. Haven't gotten to take a look at your responses yet, but it's an interesting position that Lorraine holds, and that's something that if that interests you. I've had students in the past say, "Wow, it's a really interesting position." Certainly, hers is based in the clinical side, but there are lots of folks that work in places like Healthcare Council, Western Pennsylvania. And roles like that you don't have to be a clinician to work as a lobbyist like she does. You can work outside of that, outside of the clinical role, and still do that lobbying type work, going to Harrisburg, going to wherever your state. I used to spend some time going to Albany in New York doing some of that kind of work when I was doing consulting. And so you can certainly get involved in that even if you're not a clinician. They need folks to do that kind of work if it's something you're interested in. Okay, so let's talk about the quiz. I have a few questions that I wanted to go over, but if you have questions on any of the other options, please feel free. If you received or if you got a question wrong, you have a question on the answer, please just let me know. So the first question was the 3 phases of policymaking. So 3 phases of policymaking are formulation, implementation, and modification. So there's a nice chart, and unfortunately, I'm in New York right now, and I don't have my textbook in front of me, but it seems like there's a nice chart in there that kind of broke down those 3 phases, and it's kind of a cycle. They go in a circle like this, and within each of those phases there's a number of different activities that take place. So I actually have that cycle. I'd be happy to send it out if you have questions about that policymaking cycle. But it's not like those 3 things are, that's it. You formulate, you implement, and then you potentially modify. Within each of those 3 areas, there are a multitude of different activities that take place. Those are kind of the 3 overarching activities in policymaking. The next one, if the House and Senate fail to reconcile the differences between House and Senate versions of a bill, then what? And multiple choice, so lots of answers. But the correct answer is the best answer of the ones that they gave, I'll say, is that the bill effectively dies. And that's accurate based on the answers that were given. So what happens, and this is you need to read the question closely. So what it says is if the House and Senate fail to reconcile the differences. So what happens is the House will pass a bill and the Senate will pass a bill, and there'll be different versions, obviously. So they'll come together they'll get a group of senators, a group of congressmen, congresspeople, and they'll come together, and they'll come together in committee. So this conference committee will review the bills to try to come to resolution, to try to come to a single bill that makes good sense, that is, where they make a compromise. So between the House version, Senate version, they'll try and come to a compromise bill that probably incorporates pieces of both versions that they can compromise on. This is where, if they can't compromise on them, and the committee can make no compromise, that the bill will effectively die. But there really is one other option. Sometimes what can happen, and this has happened in the past, and bills have died right there, that's it. But what also can happen is sometimes and it typically is the House of Representatives, I'm not sure why the Senate usually wins, but sometimes the House of Representatives will go back and create a new bill that will perhaps, but it could be the Senate as well, could go back and create a new bill and review and process and perhaps pass a new bill that would replace the previous one that had come to committee. And then they could bring that one to committee to compare to the House bill that was passed, or the House could create, review, revise, and then pass a new bill and bring that to committee. One or the other could do that, then they could look at that one to perhaps then take to the president. So that is an option as well, but that wasn't one of the that wasn't one of our options that was here, and that would be unusual. But so typically what's going to happen if they can't fail to resolve the differences, then the bill would just die, unfortunately. And that has, like I said, that has happened in the past. But normally they will reconcile the differences, and then ultimately the bill will go to the president for either signature or veto. And that would be that. The next one, which is the last one. Joint resolutions are the most common way for a legislation to emerge. And this is true false, obviously, and that was false. And the most common way for legislation to emerge is actually a bill. So if any of you, I know a lot of you are probably much too young to remember this, but if you ever want to get a kick out of, well, I get a kick out of it because I remember it from when I was a kid. But there's an old Schoolhouse Rock about a bill and how a bill is created. You could probably find it on YouTube. But it was kind of fun and funny when I was a kid, and that's how I actually learned about most of this stuff when I was a wee small child. But I remember showing that to my son when he was a wee small child as well. So a bill on Capitol Hill was the song that they sang, and I thought of that immediately when I saw this question. So that bill on Capitol Hill, and I'll refrain from singing the song, but is actually the most common way for legislation to emerge. And there are a bazillion, to exaggerate a bit, but there are a bazillion bills that come out that are examined each year, and most of them amount to nothing. Just like as we, throughout the process of the health reform, from the time Trump came into office up till now, it was interesting to watch people get so excited about all of these different bills, and this one's going to change this, and this one's going to change that. And I honestly thought to myself, none of these are going anywhere because most of the time these bills get all hyped up and then they don't end up getting passed because you can never get, it's so hard to get a version through the House and the Senate or a lot of times you'll get a version through the House and then the Senate will never pass anything that is even remotely close, or they won't pass anything at all. So just like the last bill that went through, passed the House and the Senate, just never passed anything. So that's typically the way things go, but a bill is the most common way for legislation to emerge. So if you have any other questions, please let me know. This upcoming week, let me click week 4. We are looking at, looks like a few different things, but really focused on stakeholders. So various stakeholders in the health policy process. And we're going to look a bit at, there was a community health assessment that was done in Allegheny County back in 2015. So we're going to look a little bit at that. I think it's a really interesting document. So we're going to look a bit at that for our discussion. And then we do have a written assignment this week as well. And we're going to look at Vermont has some interesting work that they've done with regard to healthcare and this One Health program that they have. So we're going to look at that for our written assignment. So it's really about stakeholders and how stakeholders get involved in this whole process of improving the population, the health of the population. And I realize we're not talking about population health quite yet, but it's really. Or did I already have population health with you guys? No, we had strategic planning. So you get population health coming up. So you'll get population health, where we'll dive into that stuff a little bit more. But so this will be a taste of the population health and how some of these programs can really be helpful. But this will give us a taste of the stakeholders involved in these types of programs from a policy and public health side of the world. But okay, so I'll stop yammering now, and so if you have any questions on anything, please let me know. But otherwise, I will talk to everyone soon. Thanks so much.